Hello listeners, just a quick note before we dive in. This episode featuring Luke Elworthy contains some strong language during his readings. If you're around kids or would rather avoid swearing, you might want to skip this one or grab some headphones. Enjoy the show.
Kia ora, and welcome to the Marlborough Book Festival podcast, the place where you can hear writers talk about their work, their lives, and the inspiration behind their writing. I'm Sonia, the chair of the committee. This year's festival was a fantastic weekend, and we are eager to share the recordings with you very soon. In the meantime, enjoy this engaging session from the 2023 Book Festival.
Morena e te whānau. Hi, I'm Jane Forrest-Waghorn and I am from Astrolabe Wines, and it's a great pleasure to be here on Sunday morning at the Book Festival. What better thing to do on a wintry day than to come and hear Luke talk about his book. So I'm sure you'll have a marvellous time with these two chaps. So I'll say good morning and enjoy yourselves and buy lots of books.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Jason, and I'm delighted to be here with everybody today. I think, Luke, we were expecting about 10 people, maybe 12. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Luke Elworthy, and I'm honoured to be having our morning fireside chat today.
With no champagne, Jason.
With no champagne, but we do have this beautiful Astrolabe wine. I'm sure it is.
That's very sort of clear.
Very, very clear.
Is my microphone?
Yeah, that's all right.
I expect a lot of this.
And so really looking forward to learning about your writing and to dig behind the scenes into your fabulous novel, The Last Letter of Godfrey Cheathem. Now, this morning when as I was running out the door, my wife yelled out, "Between the two of you, I don't know who's going to get the most words in." So, Luke, I promise it won't be me, because we really do want to know about you and about your book. So to begin with, would you like to tell us a little bit about The Last Letter of Godfrey Cheathem?
Sure. Well, Godfrey Cheathem starts the book writing to his sister Rosemary. He's in Marlborough prison in Christchurch for a crime that is not revealed until the end of the book. Rosemary knows exactly what he's done. She doesn't know much about his motivation. She's quite confused about why the sort of events that led to him feeling like I won't tell you what he did. You'll find out by the end of the book. But so he doesn't refer to it often in the course of the novel, which is basically a long letter which he's written to Rosemary, trying to explain not only why he did what he did, but why he felt he had to abandon his great New Zealand novel, which by the start of the letter had reached a length of 1,600 pages or something. So commercially quite a challenging proposition. So he probably wasn't wrong to feel sceptical about the chances of the book's publication. So Rosemary, in the course she replies to his letters, and she tries to push him on to deal with the events that led to his unravelling at this family reunion, which is the kind of scene of this crime he commits. And she's also trying to encourage him to carry on with the novel, which it's no spoiler to say Rosemary that Godfrey dies at the end of the book, and but his novel is published posthumously. So and Rosemary may or may not have a role in that publication. So yeah, it's a fabulous novel about self-identity, I found, and as you've described, a novel of father figures, bullshit, and belonging. You mentioned it's been written in the style of letters, and it's quite a unique style. What led you to moving into that format? That's a really good question. I suppose, going back a step, I wrote a memoir and probably started writing it in the early 2000s. at that time there'd been there was sort of a slew of business biographies that had been written by high-flying business people whose careers had sort of gone well. They'd hit a bit of a speed bump, and inevitably the business person had overcome whatever problem they encountered, and the whole thing ended in triumph. So I decided I'd have this pitch to agents to try to write about a career that was a disaster almost from start to finish. So I called the memoir "How to Succeed in Publishing," and this was me, not Godfrey, definitely didn't succeed in publishing, but when I wrote about my career really, and there was sort of, there was a period of kind of mild disappointment, and other stuff happened, and minor setback, hiccup, and the sort of trajectory was kind of like this: quiet failure, and so to sell that premise, I needed total train wreck, total disaster. So I was writing the stuff, and I'd write about real things. That I was at this is probably not answering your question at all about the letters. But
that's all right. We'll get back to my question. I was just thinking about this morning, actually. I turned up to my first sales conference at Penguin Books in London, and Bill Wyman had just published his fairly tedious memoir, Stone Alone. Bill Wyman was famous for carefully noting every detail of, lots of them sort of unmentionable really, but he never got high, never got drunk, I don't think Bill might, but he noticed everything. And we had this cardboard cutout of Bill in the boardroom thing we were having the whole sales presentation. And you can't make an enormous life-size cardboard cutout normally, but this one was fairly big, but it was also taller than Bill Wyman. So he came in, and you couldn't help but sort of notice he was Bill, and then the cutout was up here. And just little things like that, and I try and write about it, and I wanted to make it something ridiculous happen, like I bumped into the cutout, or none of this stuff happened. And so I found I was trying to create these more and more complex stories, and it wasn't true for a start, and it wasn't even true to the idea of the book I was trying to write. So at some point later, I thought about trying to turn some of this material into fiction, and the kind of letters I must have... So, a lot of this happened, almost 20 years ago, the start of this process. So, at some point I decided that he would be writing to the sister, Rosemary, and explaining those things I explained before. But, there's some other elements around that we've been discussing too. So,
Yeah. So, you've alluded to it in terms of moving from the memoirs into more of a novel, or into a novel. And I've certainly had people ask me, and there are probably people in this room who are thinking that there's more about you in this book than you'd normally expect from an author.
Jason, that's an appalling thought. I am not Godfrey Cheathem.
Thank God for that.
Someone said to me, I loved your book, but he really started to annoy me by the end, or by at one point or something. I think she got over it, but it was like, and he can be a frustrating protagonist. But I have to cop that, Jason. There's a fair bit of me and Godfrey, I think. Certainly that kind of crashing around trying to find, I suppose that identity thing, you mentioned that, trying to find where you kind of want to fit in the world, and trying to find that within career and life generally. It's, that's a fascinating process. But I was probably teasing out some stuff about, I think I first started to sit and write the memoir when I was working. Meredith and my partner and I had left Sydney, and we'd moved to Arrowtown for some... it's a very nice place to live, but I don't know quite why we went... Anyway, we thought, this is very pretty. And we didn't have I was working for a friend of mine who had an antiques business there. And I'd be sort of feeling like I should be madly polishing the furniture, but what I really was doing was writing this memoir about how the hell did I come to have this reasonably successful publishing career. Now I'm polishing furniture in my friend's kind of fairly chaotic antiques business, and then I started to look back at this career, and so again I veered completely off the question, but plenty of me and Godfrey, but not too much.
Not too much.
Only the likeable bits are kind of all me.
He seemed quite an awkward character and out of place in when he went to boarding school. Was that something similar? Was that a similar experience for you at Christ College?
Yeah, I suppose. All of my family had gone there, or my father and generations before him had all gone to the school. My mother and, the Diana, Godfrey's mother in the book, again, there are kind of elements of my mother, and they're fairly superficial ones, actually. But she was completely opposed to the idea of me going off to boarding school. And so my father and mother separated probably about a year before I went, and her life was, getting slightly more unruly, messy. And the decision was taken, my father said, would you like to go to boarding school? And in fact, going back, I had been enrolled or whatever, had my name down to go to Christ College when I was very young. And then Mum, decided, no, not happening. And after Mum and Dad separated, then it was thought, I think, that my sisters would be able to better cope with the increasing upheaval in my mother's life, actually, and that it would be better if I went to boarding school, which seems a little unfair, particularly considering some of the things that happened to my sisters after that. But, so I felt slightly out of place, but, I had cousins there, and, you just run around trying to kind of fit in, and it's probably true of everyone else at the school. We were all kind of working out where we fitted and how we could, it's something of a survival game for a bit, but yeah.
It's and like you say, you went to boarding school. Your mother and your sisters went to Centrepoint.
Yeah, not quite as cleanly as that, but about a year. Actually, sorry, yes. By the time I started, about midway through boarding school, was when Mum became a foundation sort of member at Centrepoint and took the girls with her.
Yeah, and you've alluded to a similar situation for Godfrey. Where he visited commune there as well. Going back to Godfrey, his family was extremely creative, and albeit with some pressure from his father and his father's side to actually get some money out of his creativity. Should we take a little bit of a look at? I have a reading of
Sure.
When Godfrey first explores his creativity.
Yep, sure. Just to sort of introduce that, there's so Godfrey's family have a series of family meetings. This sort of evolved from Godfrey's cousins who live at the sort of rural property where Godfrey's father grew up. Have very kind of serious family meetings. So the country cousins are having meetings about sort of social deportment and what they should do in their business and even political careers, perhaps how to make New Zealand a better place. The urban creative cousins, instigated by Godfrey's mother, have a series of sort of almost rival meetings, really, because Godfrey's mother is determined that her children are all going to be, it's going off again, isn't it?
Oh, that's bigger.
Are going to be successful in the creative arts, and there are roles sort of appointed for them, or they choose their own role. But Diana wants everybody to have their. So there's one of them's a musician, one a visual artist, one a kind of becomes an actor and screenwriter. So this is one of the early. Godfrey's role is a little less clear at this point. So this is I think this might even be the first family meeting. Looking at these readings, there's an awful lot of swearing. It's gone off again?
No, you're good.
I think the readings are probably all at moments of maximum pressure for Godfrey, which is why he swears all the time, but he does spend a lot of the book under pressure, so sorry about the fucks. Okay, things got serious. The first meeting began with Father saying we all needed to talk. It was fine for us to pursue art. Damon can listen to Tchaikovsky and Liszt, he said, as long as we never lost sight of associated income possibilities. We were all ears. But the meeting survived and even prospered, and within the framework they provided, we learned we could take any nascent artistic hopes and develop them. At least that was the idea. My nascent artistic hope was pottery. I really fucking hated pottery. I'd rarely been as unhappy as when sitting at the wheel, kneading and teasing the clay to please our mother. She was determined that some of the most celebrated artists in all of 1970s New Zealand were sculptural potters. The potters were bigger than poets like James K. Baxter, Mother said, and more influential than novelists like Maurice Shadbolt or filmmakers like Barry Barclay. And they sold their work overseas, out into the famous wider cultural universe, which we New Zealanders instinctively knew was an important thing to do. But how I hated pottery. It was all a bit distressing. Father couldn't even bring himself to use the word. If he had to mention my work with clay, he would talk about earthenware or engaging with malleable media. This sounded a lot more important than being a humble potter, so Father's nomenclature, albeit gravely highfalutin, almost gave the world of pots some real credibility. But in truth, Father was always vehemently anti-clay. I think he just understood that if he talked like this about pottery, he turned it from being the delicate art form Mother loved into being a technique or a science, or even a business, things she said she really despised. Godfrey's pieces are extraordinarily sculptural, Mother said. Oh, my work was sculptural, all right. If you couldn't tug and twist your lump of mud into something with some utilitarian value, maybe an incense stick holder or a dog bowl, as I demonstrably could not, you poked your thumb into it as it spun around on a gruesome turntable of terracotta torture, its whirring grooves filled with dun-coloured silted water, tugged on the glutinous rim a little, and suddenly, squelch, you had a piece of sculpture. You'd very possibly created art that would taunt and confront or move people to feel awkward and best unfelt thoughts, and maybe even sell for a decent price internationally. When I brought my first piece home, it had started out as a night at the round table, turned into a microbus, and ended up as lumpy cumulonimbus in Storm Warning 2, a work in clay with mixed media, Raku pit fired, Mother wept.
It's fair to say the further you read on that, and Godfrey, you know, he travels internationally, has careers in London and in Europe. Is it fair to say he has a bit of imposter syndrome, or is he just useless?
He did. I think we all have imposter syndrome, though, don't we?
Damn, you've just answered my next question.
We think we suffer from it worse than anybody else, but he's kind of unaware of the kind of chaos that roils around him a lot of the time, Godfrey, and some of his successes, and he really does reach the pinnacle of London publishing. Sometimes it almost seems to happen by mistake to him. He's in the right place at the right time. But he never, as with his whole life, he never quite knows where he fits. And when good things are happening, he's very suspicious of why that might be. So yeah, and I think he's definitely he can feel like an imposter.
Mm. And what about your own career in publishing? You're self-published now.
Yeah.
Where did your career first begin?
My publishing career started probably in the late 80s. I worked as a sales rep for Angus and Robertson, who are Australian retailers, but they had a publishing presence in New Zealand. and then quite quickly after that went to work for Random House. Before that I did have 2 years on working for the Timaru Herald, which is also, I borrowed a bit of that for Godfrey's career. So I worked in New Zealand for probably 4 or 5 years, and then went to London, and so I was really mostly on the marketing and sales side of the business. I was sort of regional sales and marketing director for an American, for the company called Macmillan, which is big in the UK. The Macmillan US is actually an entirely separate company, so I worked for Macmillan US in the Netherlands, or in London first and then in the Netherlands. But I've done lots of things, and probably my last proper publishing job, now seems quite a long time ago, was working for Murdoch Books in Sydney, who published a whole lot of, they were sort of big in leisure and lifestyle things, and again, Godfrey, there's a lot of sort of fun poked at, well, I had fun poking fun at, there's a whole, probably another conversation about Murdoch Books. Godfrey is hired by this company called Give to Live. Was it Live to Give or Give to Live? I think it's Live to Give.
Live to Give.
And they have what would have used to been a personnel department. I think, what do we call it? Sort of human resources. Then personnel became human resources. I think Godfrey makes, it says at one point, these sort of tasks would have been performed by the managing director's secretary, but at Murdoch Books, this is absolutely true. The personnel department was called the Department for Transformation and Discovery, and we would meet. We had the two kind of core elements of working for Murdoch Books. You had to I suppose it was every month, well, at least every month, you would have to turn up to a share, and you would have to share. There were two things. There was a share, and then there was the highs and lows. And highs and lows, I think, were supposed to be kind of more related to your career. So you would talk about a career high and a career low, and I would sort of make things up. Really, I would sort of, and Godfrey does this to you to sort of, start bullshitting about some fantastic success you'd achieved during the week, and you would also have these shares where you'd talk about something personal. I mean, it's just ghastly. I hope this sort of fashion's gone out of corporate life now, but people kind of almost broke down trying to, anyway, and they were probably, the company was very successful and people seemed to quite like working for them, but definitely not my scene.
That's extraordinary, because that's one part of the book that I thought, well, that's just far too outlandish to be real.
No, absolutely true.
So with that level of experience in publishing and publishing houses, what led you to self-publishing this book as opposed to going down the traditional route?
No one else wanted to publish it? No. So I submitted this to 2 New Zealand publishers. I did send out some queries to agents and things and got a certain way with, people requesting 50 pages and then a full manuscript in a few cases. But I sent it to a former colleague of mine at Random House who had read the memoir, some of which kind of shoehorned into here. She helped me, sort of suggested a rewrite to the kind of second half, and we went a certain way down this, down a kind of publishing path, I suppose. I went away, rewrote it, and there's loads of elements that were never there in the first draft she read. Well, not first draft, but the version she read. And then she sent that out to 2 readers, and one of them loved it, and one, I think she said a younger man loved it, an older woman said clever to a fault, I think. I never quite know about clever to a fault, whether that's... but I think it's the same, it's a bit tricksy. There's stuff going on with... You have to read it and find out, but there are kind of a few layers, and I find all that stuff, I love that, and I possibly could have, ditched some of the kind of framing that we haven't talked about, but we possibly might, and you'll pick it up quickly if you read the book. But so those elements potentially get in the way of, they make it more complicated, I suppose, and I also sent it to another New Zealand publisher who was very kind about it, but just said he thought it would be too small a market. And both of them are probably right, really. I've been really pleased with how it sold. But so I guess I had a story that I felt worked as I wanted it to work, and I think, I think it would be great if it could go wider than New Zealand. But I didn't want to. There weren't many other independent publishing houses, and the options are kind of broader now. But there weren't nearly as many small independents as there are today. And because I'd worked in publishing, and I thought, well, I'm just going to have a go. And I've got really good contacts there, and I had good people helping me. So I'm pleased I went and self-published.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic that you've seen you've been the book right from the beginning through to pounding the streets. And likewise back with Godfrey. And his highs and lows in publishing. You've got one excerpt there that I think is a fantastic piece, and is the introduction to it's the launch event really for the New Zealand literary.
That's right. Yeah, they in England, at least in the novel, there's a year of New Zealand literature happens, and I thought that was a terribly funny idea when I was writing this in the early 2000s. It seemed preposterous that there could be an international year of New Zealand literature, but actually it's not unlikely at all now. But so Godfrey is a key instigator. So I think the real Kerry Hume has won the Booker for the Bone people in here, and New Zealand books and letters are just the hottest thing in the world of letters. And Godfrey has to think about who else there might be in New Zealand that his publisher employers can bring down to be part of this festival of New Zealand literature. So there's a character he's met who is called, she has two names just to make it really simple. She's Victoria Cumberpatch, who's a kind of crusading economic reformer, and she's based not quite closely on Ruth Richardson, whom I took on a book tour at one point. But Victoria Cumberpatch, as well as writing her sort of blueprints for international, government and regulatory change, writes sort of semi-erotic novels. And what Godfrey has to achieve is that the crusading economic reformer is not known to British readers. You've got to stick with this premise. But so they're really interested in Jo Purdon, the popular novelist. So Godfrey has to make sure that she's not exposed. But so they're just heading down to the launch of the Year of New Zealand Literature, which does, I should say, the Year of New Zealand Literature ends up closing early after a trimester through. I think I lost the sound. Back again. I'll read it anyway. There we go. Still, Jo and I drove bravely down to a hotel on the seafront of Torquay. My first ever literary festival, helping father placate some of his poets never published, had alerted me to the New Zealand publishing industry's penchant for the down-at-heels charms. Can everyone hear me without the mic on? No. Oh, sorry. The down-at-heel charms of once fashionable seaside resorts. That this was an international book industry phenomenon became evident on arrival at the Palladium Hotel in Torquay. Jo said she found it charming, but the Palladium was on the bones of its arse. By 8 p.m. that evening, Jo Purdon was getting up to deliver her keynote presentation, the reputation of New Zealand literature resting on her powerfully padded shoulders. She read from The Mountainhead. The crowd listened, attentively at first, before a shuffling could be felt and a low rumbling sound gathered strength. It was an excited-sounding commotion to my ear, and it looked like it was going to go well. We just have to hope she was right about no one recognising her as the right winger, and at least she hadn't mentioned the E word. Then she mentioned the E word. Had the moment of disaster arrived, just then Jo seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if she were teetering on the edge of a precipice. lush meadows of love on one side, the dry chasm of economics on the other. I forget when she first uttered the phrase effective marginal tax rate policy, but it marked a moment, the point of no return. Fuck off! It was a cry from the audience. Screw your bastard marginal tax rate policy. We don't want it. These were worrying developments, and for a moment I fantasized about the arrival of some literary jihadists enforcing a fatwa as they tried to sabotage the event, creating chaos and confusion before they went in for the kill, wiping another pesky New Zealand author from the face of the earth. But Joe paused, eyeballed a man in the audience who shouted, "They already tried the fucking poll tax," and the heckling slowly began to subside. When, finally, there was no more rudeness, I felt some sympathy for my fellow colonial. She picked up her book again and I breathed a sigh of relief. But Jo put down her weighty novel just as quickly, moving slowly towards her laptop, placed beside a black projector. There was no jeering now, just a bemused silence. And then this, I kid you not, Ro is his sister Rosemary. She began it, a fucking PowerPoint presentation. In the early 1990s, PowerPoint was fresh out of the box. Yeah, I know, you've already told me how it became the software of choice for the US military when it presented its planned invasions of Muslim countries. In the early 1990s, PowerPoint might have been basic, but Jo Purden rode the software like a jockey, ruthlessly whipping everything she could from the graphs and flow diagrams, the then innovative PowerPoint bullets, illustrating her personal growth and development as a crusading economic thinker. There was a moment, almost half an hour into her show, when the crowd appeared to be swaying gently in a semi-catatonic state, moving as one as phrases like deregulation of the food processing industry rolled out of Jo/Victoria's lips and floated intoxicatingly round their heads in a scene reminiscent of the Grateful Dead playing in Haight-Ashbury. Were they lulled into a stupor or about to move exotically before turning in a frenzied headlong rush to dance in her mosh pit? Neither. They looked profoundly enraged, and two of them ran at her, apparently trying to throw her off the stage. Of course, I sprinted to protect Jo, but she'd moved quickly out of a rear door. I shouted after her, but she was gone. I felt sick at that moment, not with any yearning or feeling of thwarted desire, but as in I wanted to vomit. It's not a very attractive place to finish, but...
So, Luke, you mentioned Ruth Richardson before and taking her on a book tour. How was that?
Well, it was really fun. I got to really admire Ruth, actually. In fact, I found myself worryingly taking on a lot of her political beliefs. She's a very powerful, persuasive character. And, in fact, in the novel... Godfrey sort of starts to really fall for Victoria Cumberbatch. And I don't think I totally started to fall for Ruth, but there was something, like it's these charismatic, particularly charismatic women politicians, I think, and particularly charismatic women politicians on the right. It's scary. You don't want to be, I found myself professing to believe things that I didn't really believe at all before going on this book tour with her, but we had a really good time. I've been meaning to send her this book, actually. So she'd published her memoir, or sort of autobiography, really, called, I think it was called Making a Difference. Does anyone remember this? In the 1990s, probably, mid-1990s. And her book went straight to number one. We reprinted in sort of 10 days. I would say, I was working for my father and stepmother at this point. I'm going to say 10,000 copies at least, which you can see Robbie Burton there, a pretty healthy number. But so we'd finished the book tour. We were in Dunedin. We just had the last night of the tour, and we were going to meet at places that really Big Bush was partly based on. So the family home where my father grew up, and Ruth and my father and uncle and a few others were all meeting there to sort of celebrate the successful tour. And Ruth and I took off from Dunedin. We were coming up that coast. Is it Waikouaiti or, you've come down from the hills and you've met the sea again. and I had my old sort of silver 19-something Ford Laser, and it started to splutter a little bit. And I thought, I couldn't see what was wrong here, but it was slightly worrying. I looked at the petrol gauge, and I'd failed to fill up as I'd meant to the night before we left Dunedin. And Ruth spotted it straight away. I was refused to believe that we'd run out of petrol, but she said, "Oh, fuck." And we pulled to a stop beside the highway. And she had this big kind of trench coat thing on, and she wore dark glasses. I was thinking about this the other day. Does anyone remember that character Anthony Scaramucci, who was sort of involved with Trump at some point? Mm. She's kind of had that Anthony Scaramucci look, really. She had those sort of little aviator glasses and this thing. I don't think she had a hat, but we would have got over it, but it was definitely a bad look to run out. So I had to go and get some gas and return with this farmer who was quite inquisitive and sort of peered in, and she sat there like this, hiding. And anyway, I don't know if anybody was any the wiser, but she promised never to mention the story ever again. And then we were making speeches at this celebratory dinner that night, and she told the whole thing really to her own. So, along with another. Oh, I'm really digressing. How long?
No.
I know there was a story about she had not that long before been to South America. She really was travelling the world, selling the story of the great New Zealand economic miracle. And she said she had a short skirt on with these Argentinian all blokes, and there was this joke going around. I'm almost starting to regret starting this one. There was basically they were saying in Spanish, "She's got big balls." I think her dress, there was something to do with the length of the skirt anyway, but that was, and Ruth told us the story, and absolutely loved it. She loved being the big bald economic reform crusader going down and telling the South Americans how to reform their economy.
Being chauffeured around in a Ford Laser. Talking about your writing process, Luke. This wasn't a 1 or a 2 month process, was it?
No. I don't know if Meredith's here now, but it was dangerous getting onto this sort of territory. Probably, you've heard about these various iterations of the story, but it sort of bubbled away for the best part of 20 years, really. I probably wrote the first words of this memoir that had some part in this, 2005, 2006.
Mm. How did you maintain the momentum?
Well, you've answered that question. Answered your own question there, Jason.
But in terms of keeping over 20 years, keeping it on some form of track, story-wise, that must have been quite challenging for you to really, I guess, when you were creating the book, to pick up from where you left off 3 years ago, and come back in fresh.
I suppose that whole time from initial first sort of word on paper or on screen or whatever to publication in 20 years. But I mean, I probably had 18 months of really intense writing that shaped most of what is in the novel today. So that I probably, I was getting at it a reasonable amount, but at the same time, I didn't want to be doing too much of it because the chance of any kind of financial return from an endeavour like this are minimal. Mm. So it was something that I should never really have been doing, and I kind of tried to do quite a lot of it in secret and pretend to. No, I've got to be careful here, Jason. That's just, You
didn't tell Meredith you were speaking today, did you?
What's that?
You didn't tell Meredith you were speaking?
No. Okay. She's been kept out of the whole process.
Your the one thing that really stood out for me was your characterisation, and just how deep you go into Godfrey's mind and into his spirit. For you, what comes first, the plot or the character, and which leads which?
I think it's a really interesting question, and for me it changes. In this book, I think character, and then trying to sort of impose a plot, because I was kind of not hamstrung, but I had this memoir to novel thing going on, and these real career events which I could use or not use. So plot definitely came later, but I mean, at the moment I'm trying to write something which is really, really plotty, and it's almost in reverse, because I'm not. There was a period when I fell out of love with what I'm doing at the moment, and it's only now I'm really. That's a whole other topic, but the characters are, as I am understanding more about them, and in this case, there's no connection to anything really much in a life I know. They're becoming much more interesting to me. But in this case, both approaches have kind of worked or not worked for me in the past.
And do you manage to compartmentalise your writing, or does it take over your life once you've started, say in that last 18 months? Were you able to go, right, for this period of time I'm going to be head down writing, and then over dinner I'm not going to be thinking at all about Godfrey, or is it always churning away in your mind?
We're still on really dangerous territory, Jason. I guess as soon as we move off my writing process, I'll be really happy. There was a sign I saw during this. There's a Writers Guild of America strike at the moment, as you probably know, and I saw one of the protesters, or picketers, or whatever, one of the writers. His sign said something like, "There's nothing I'd rather do than not write, so I can do this for a while," which doesn't quite address financial need and how he's going to feed his family, but. I'd certainly know the feeling. I can spend an awful lot of time not writing at all, and most of the time I would say I'm happy in not writing. After this book was published, because I've been so kind of involved in the mechanics of publication, and I hadn't been working on anything new, and you get kind of a little bit addicted to that sugar hit of a bit of attention, a few nice reviews, and was on the bestseller list, and you get nice emails from people, and I thought, well, this is very nice. And then that kind of fades a bit, and you think, oh, what am I going to do now? And it's this project that I'm working on, which is, I've kind of returned to something I started about 5 years ago. That is really, I'm thrilled again. So I've remembered how cool it is to be in the middle of writing something that is quite plotty, as I said, but where the plot happens with characters that I'm getting increasingly fond of.
So tell us about this new project.
Well, I probably shouldn't say too much, because nothing will happen probably, and then I'll think, why the hell did I mention that at the Marlborough Book Festival? But I'm calling it a horticultural heist caper. Someone mentioned to me on Friday that heist's not really a word we use very often in New Zealand, I suppose, but most people understand what a heist is. And but in this case, it's set in the world of competitive rose breeding. So my two characters are, one of whom lives in New Zealand, one lives in England. They're rose growers and breeders, and one wants the other's rose. So, but a lot of the action happens in and around two disastrous garden festivals. Not at all like Garden Marlborough, which is a very successful garden festival. But and in fact, it's remarkable. I was thinking how little the story owes to Garden Marlborough. I better make that absolutely clear. I can see Richard McFarlane in the back there, so I'm pretty worried. But it's been great fun, and I was thinking, so that's I probably shouldn't say anything more about the plot, but there's definitely a plot, and there's some death, and there's lots of stuff. There's also a bit of a love story. But also I was thinking, it's kind of it's a way for me to say fond things about living in small towns. I don't know about you, but I spend some of the time you think, oh my God, I'd love to leave this place, get out of Blenheim, and but actually I love living here, and in the course of writing this book and writing about sort of simple. They don't have to be simple small town things, but some of them are things that could only happen in a small town. So it's quite fond. There was something, Meredith and I do a Meals on Wheels run. I drive and she delivers. And there was a mix-up with, how are we going on time? Good. She left someone's special dietary meal behind in the car or something. I can't remember there were 2 meals supposed to be delivered to someone or other on McLaughlin Street. And anyway, it's quite, some quite complex instructions on the Meals on Wheels Street, the codes and all sorts of things. Anyway, and then suddenly I was thinking about this and I thought, what if this meal she tried to deliver, maybe if perhaps Mrs. Budd had died. And then suddenly I was off on this whole thing. So I've got this huge scene about this Meals on Wheels crisis. And anyway, I'm sorry to bring Meredith so much into this, but anyway, Meals on Wheels? People are going to want to read about Meals on Wheels? I said it's not about Meals on Wheels. Anyway, so there's kind of, and I've got my very quiet main character, Max Stapleton, he doesn't live with his mother anymore because he bought a house, he's in his late 30s and he bought the house next door to his mother, which really upset her. But his sort of recreational pursuit is going off pig hunting with his friend Nathan Pugsley, he can't actually commit the final knife jab. So that's what the quiet-mannered Max Stapleton does. But anyway, these are some of the small town things that happen. But I hope you'll all buy a copy when it's published in 20 years' time.
We're looking forward to that. So coming back to the last letter of Godfrey Cheathem, things come to a head at a family reunion. And this is based rather loosely on your own family reunion.
Very loosely.
Very loosely.
Yeah. So, it's Godfrey's world unravels at this family reunion. So this is to celebrate 150 years of the Cheathams in New Zealand. And so Godfrey's come back from London. His career has flourished, and then he's been spectacularly undone by a very poor business decision. And he's been fired. His marriage has broken up. He's sort of estranged from his young son, and he's had to turn up to the family reunion, a bit like a class reunion and his creative siblings are at the absolute peak of their creative powers, and so he's arrived. There's a dawn sort of service at the reunion. Godfrey's cousin Malcolm has orchestrated the whole thing, and he's arranged for the local iwi to put on a porphyry, and there's a karanga, and Godfrey's very uneasy about that. He feels that Malcolm is using the local iwi sort of cynically, and Godfrey actually he goes from the car park and goes up to the top of the house to sort of hide, really. He's not ready to face the pressure of the reunion, and he looks down on as all the wider family are gathering for a family photograph. So that's kind of the background to this bit. As the karanga faded away at last, picked up and carried off into those hopeless mists that always fucked your head, I could see, standing in a prominent position near the front of a group of my assembled siblings, Damon. Even now I can remember lines from the story in the local paper, The Bugle, my old employer, run the previous day. The reporter clearly overcome by the fact the Cheatham siblings were gathering from all points of the globe. Damon Cheathem, the piece went, the composer of the magnificent Symphony of the Innumerable Multitudes, whose most recent work, a high-concept electronic composition, has been adapted for the London stage to rapturous acclaim. They'd written about Sonia too, the actor and filmmaker, how she was flying in from New York on a 24-hour dash from the set of her latest movie. The second of Herbert Cheatham's three daughters, the artist Madeline Cheatham, something about her installation piece Nirvana Machine, supposed to be a meditation on the nature of time, elements of water and sand blasting through pipes going nowhere. Heavily favoured to win this year's Turner Prize, Britain's controversial visual arts award. Blah, blah, fucking blah. You might have been Herbert's youngest daughter, a housewife who lives in the region, but at least you got a mention. But where were you now, I wondered. I'd lost you again. Where was I, you might well have asked. I'd wanted to share in the occasion in a family sense, but I'd now had to relieve myself so often I felt I must keep to the bushy fringes. My pissing problem had to be more than just a reflex response to the uncertainty I felt, and I wondered again if it wasn't early prostate trouble. I'd mentioned the possibility to Tracy on the phone that week, Tracy's his wife, and frankly, she couldn't have been less interested. I got caught in the wild Matagari at that point, taking another leak. I cursed great-grandfather Hadwin, who'd never accepted the native plant was a weed and let it go, never to be fully repelled again, as I felt the shrub attack. There can be no more pleasant sensation than being rasped in the nether regions by the thorns of a Matagari. It was as if those evil little spikes had plunged directly into the heart of my failing male reproductive and urinary systems. Becoming hopelessly entangled in the grasping plant, I uttered the inevitable obscenity as I crashed to the ground. All this fucking Matagari! Poking my head up cautiously, I could see that the wailing of the karanga was halted, the call of welcome interrupted, the singers looking as bewildered as if they'd stopped at an intersection lacking reliable global positioning data. Oh, Jesus Christ, I heard someone say. Godfrey's got himself caught in the bush. It was Damon, bleating like a goat, who'd exposed me. He wasn't afraid to raise his voice in a crowd. I hadn't seen him display a hint of self-doubt for years, but why should he? He had no need of it. As I was picking myself out of the foliage, I heard Malcolm tap the microphone. Excuse me, cough, pause, tap. It was Malcolm's porphyry. Of course he could mess with the protocol. Get on with it, you fucker. Welcome, he belted out, almost an angry call. Welcome to Big Bush. So that's the whole, it all goes on from there, and Godfrey's position becomes more and more uncomfortable, and you'll have to read what happens.
It sounded very personal.
My prostate's in really good nick. I don't know why. I don't know. He's fairly neurotic, as you might have gathered by now, and something of a hypochondriac. Possibly that served me, but I don't know why I had him. Yeah, I don't know why. Anyway, that's him.
Now, Luke, and unfortunately, we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours yet, but time is ticking along. So we've got time for a couple of questions. Has anybody got any questions? Yep.
Find out who those males belong to.
Yes, we did. And they're both alive. We just, we won't make that mistake again, will we, Meredith? I don't think she is here.
Luke, you talked about sort of doing a rewrite of the second bit. Is that what ended up being published, or did you stick with what you had originally?
The rewrite. Oh, that's a good question. To be honest, it's so long ago I can barely remember. I think it's probably more to do with a lot of the rewriting involved this character. For those of you who read the book will understand that there's a kind of framing device where Godfrey's posthumously published novel has been discovered by someone called Brian Bode, and Brian Bode is a sort of play on the name of a real professor of English literature at Auckland University called Brian Boyd. And he's the world's foremost expert on Vladimir Nabokov. So I thought it'd be funny to have this Brian Bode be the Nabokov expert and also the expert on Godfrey Cheathem. So a lot of that stuff was new to the version that I was going to say her name. Then I shouldn't say the name of the person, but anyway, So that.
Have you got a preferred time of day to write? Are you best writing in the morning with a coffee or evening with
That's
a red wine?
your worst question yet, Jason. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Meredith.
No, or early in the morning.
Yep.
Definitely better in the morning. That's probably but any time of the day I can have a go. Someone else must have a question. Well, Meredith, my partner, grew up here, and we were living in Wellington. We'd been living in Sydney for a long time and came back to Wellington via Arrowtown. Meredith's mother was selling her house where we now live. The house had been on the market for quite a while. We put our kids into Rapara school for a term, thinking we'd stay for a term at most. The house didn't sell, and the price came down a bit. Anyway, we thought we could sell up in Wellington and move here, and for Meredith it was coming back home. So, although she hadn't lived here for a long time. So that was in 2011, I think, 2010 to 2011. So, yeah, that's... Sean, you definitely shouldn't... Are you sure you should be doing this?
Thank you, Luke. That's been a very enjoyable session today. I guess going back to your time at Murdoch Books and when you spoke about highs and lows, obviously to get to where you are now, is there a couple of highs and lows in this process that you've can think of at this moment?
I have to borrow one from Godfrey. Godfrey borrowed it from me, but introducing a really unique racking solution for the range of sort of garden books at in discount price stores. That would have to be an absolute high. There was I've really got one of my lows. This happened in a share, actually. The All Blacks had lost. Can someone remind me of? There was the World Cup semi-final, I think, against France. Probably don't have many rugby supporters at literary festivals. Quarter-final. And we lived in a tiny apartment in Sydney. And I've still got this bad habit of, trying to sort of move like the players when I'm watching a game. And this is quite distracting for Meredith. So I set up a television on our lavatory, which is very small, and I made a bed in the kind of shower and sat. The step into the shower was my sort of pillow. It was really quite comfortable. And in the middle of the night, this is what I shared with the Murdoch Books people, to my eternal regret. But anyway, the television fell on top of me, and this is absolutely true. And the door couldn't open, so I had to scream at Meredith to wake her up to get her to open the door. We hoisted the television off, and life went on, but the All Blacks went and lost, and so I thought I would recount the tale to my colleagues the next day, but it wasn't. Yeah, you shouldn't have tried to be clever or funny at a share.
One more?
Thanks for bringing joy to our morning. It's wherever did your dry wit and capacity to see things through a lens that means you don't take yourself too seriously, how did that happen? How did you get that?
Ooh. Gosh, I'm not... Yeah, that's a really hard one.
Molly, we might expand for half an hour.
Well, I think all sort of humour comes from that place of uncertainty and unease and, the best humour I like, sort of discomfort, really. I don't know. I was thinking about something as we were leading up to today, and I went on this book tour with a friend, an English friend who'd come out, and he'd got himself really badly sort of bent out of shape on the plane, and he's not very well anyway. And we were doing these sort of speeches up and down the country, really, and I was getting these critiques from him and from Meredith, who said, this sort of bumbling style of self-deprecation is all right to a point, but, if you can overdo it and become this ridiculous caricature of an incompetent, bumbling person. So sometimes I think I'm putting it on a bit, but anyway, that's just me, I suppose.
Mm. Well, Luke, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing so much so much insight about your writing process and about the book and the new one to come in 20 years' time. Certainly look forward to, I'll put that in the calendar. And Luke's book, The Last Letter of Godfrey Cheathem, is out in the foyer. I highly recommend you grab a copy. And Luke, I hope you'll be there to sign some copies for people.
Thank you, Jason, too. It's been really fun.
Share some other stories. So, yeah, thanks for bringing some great light to a fairly dull Sunday morning out there.
Thanks.
That was another great conversation from the 2023 Marlborough Book Festival. For more information about the event, head to marlboroughbookfest.co.nz. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes soon.